For our 2 o'clock session, I would like to introduce Bhunesh Rajput, who is from SentinelOne, is an enterprise manager for cloud. So he's going to take us through a session, as I say, not really sure what has happened to the lights, but it's a nice intimate session for the afternoon. So let's hope you don't fall asleep, but I'm sure Bhunesh's session will be really engaging. I will hand over to Bhunesh.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So in 2023, the total amount of money spent on cloud, public cloud product and services is close to 600 billion. That number is expected to grow and hit $1 trillion in the next 2 years. And I think we're going to hit that number even sooner than that. One of the biggest challenges in the cloud is security. And I'm sure if you've attended other sessions, I think the guy before me, Tanian, did a great job explaining it. One of the biggest challenges is security in the cloud. So that's why we're going to focus on one of the strategies. There are many strategies for security in the cloud, but we're going to talk about cloud defense in depth. And within that, we're going to talk about shift left, right? I'm saying it right? I always mix it. Shift left, shield right, which loosely sort of translates into building security early in the product lifecycle when you're building applications, and then running whatever you're running and putting security in that. So covering your entire lifecycle from code to production. Before we go into the presentation, that is actually me. I was just talking to Kristen about it yesterday. That's 10 years ago. So I'm a cloud specialist. I've been in SentinelOne for 2.5 years. Been in cloud security industry for about 10 years. For those of you who have never heard of SentinelOne, we are a cybersecurity company. We do autonomous detection and response of incidents in the cloud, but also other parts of your IT organization. But we do it using machine learning and AI. It wouldn't be a good presentation if I didn't say AI. But we've been doing it for the last 10 years. So that's the quick introductions, no more selling. In terms of our agenda, we're going to talk about the cloud security risk. So we're going to talk about the context, the why, the how this happens. And then we're going to focus on the security market and what the market is doing to address that risk. We have an example of an attack, which is a ransomware attack in a Linux machine. We're going to go through that attack in real time, not a demo, but through the presentation. And then we're going to give you some recommendations on things you need to consider when you're thinking of your own cloud security strategy. So hopefully that will cover it. And if we have time, which we should, because I speak really fast, we should take Q&As. I was trying to slow down. So security risk. According to some estimates, and there are many facts and figures, according to some research, the total amount of incidents happening today, 45% of them are happening in the cloud. And of those incidents, 80% of businesses have at least one incident in the last year. We are seeing a rise in Linux-based attacks. Ransomware is now moving into the cloud, and Linux is basically the bedrock of the modern cloud. So we're seeing an uptake and a staggering increase in Linux-based attacks in the last 2 years. We are also seeing, vulnerabilities in applications which are running in the cloud, which are sometimes containerized. According to some estimates, 3 out of 4 containers running in production have severe or high or critical vulnerabilities in them. So we know that cloud is, we all know cloud is secure compared to on-premise, but we know that the attacks are rising in the cloud and there are new kinds of attacks coming into the cloud. The reason for those attacks are quite, self-explanatory, really. Adversaries follow the money. I talked about this early in the presentation. The amount of money being spent on the cloud is about to hit $1 trillion in the next 2 years. So all of the bad actors are going to focus where the money is. Now, it also doesn't help, well, it does help actually, that all of your traditional institutions like banking, government organizations, they are moving data into the cloud. And then you have the digital native businesses, the businesses which are built on the cloud. It's a huge economy now, right? According to Statistica, which is like a research firm, 60% of corporate data now lives in public cloud. So that's a good enough reason for bad actors to move into that. Now, couple that up with the lack of security frameworks, lack of policies and architecture which are easily adopted, which can be scalable, which can be used, lack of skills, accountability, a lot of things happening. I mean, the pace of development in the cloud is constant, and the security teams or security organizations still playing catch up. So they're not being able to catch up with the pace of development, which is why there's a gap. And the bad actors, the adversaries, they make use of that gap. They try and they get ROI from it, right? Now add the element of AI in this, like you have generative AI, which is now being used to build new kinds of ransomware, new kinds of attack paths. This has become even easier for even the less sophisticated attackers to go and sort of hurt organizations really. The number one public enemy for cloud breaches is misconfiguration or misconfigured public resources. Now these are not the S3 buckets anymore. This is more than that. They are Elasticsearch instances, OpenSearch instances. You're always like one click away from opening something to public in a cloud environment. And even though the CSPs, the Amazon, the Azure, the GCP make it super easy in terms of implementing basic border baseline security, it's really easy to make mistakes. And misconfigurations are just that. We make mistakes, and those mistakes can cost us sometimes. So that's number one reason of incidents happening in the cloud. The other one is compromised credentials, which essentially is, think of it like your credentials being exposed on GitHub repositories, public and private, for example, or your access keys being in your Slack channel. And if anybody gets access to your network or through social engineering or other means, they can get hold of those access keys and boom, they're in your network. And the last bit is vulnerable web applications. And these applications could use the building blocks of how we build applications, right? Vulnerable applications, open source or commercial, and that happens quite often where we are busy building quickly, but we don't have the right security controls in place, and then we have vulnerable applications running. The top impacts, the implications of when bad things happen. First one, double extortion, which is when data is both encrypted and exfiltrated, and then it's put on ransom. This happens a lot often, and we work with a lot of companies, and this is one of the things SentinelOne specializes in. Resource theft, which is an example of would be crypto hijacking. When anybody who gets access to your credentials then can leech on your compute resources. In 2021, there was a news of a cryptojacking where an adversary was able to cost a company 45,000 just so they can make 800 pounds worth of cryptocurrency. So it happens quite often, and they were using Lambda functions, and they were spinning those Lambda functions every 3 minutes for 15 minutes. So it was very hard to capture them, and this happens quite often. Then you have your data theft, which is very common. So not your regular data, but they are going after more valuable data like your IP, your credit card information, PI information, something which is more valuable that could be sold online, the dark web. And then you have more traditional DDoS attacks and sort of customer breaches. There you go, sorry. So I mentioned SentinelOne is a cybersecurity company. This is one of the things that we do. We keep a very close eye on ransomware. And one of the things we have seen is the shift of ransomware from your traditional on-prem environments moving into the cloud, and specifically in Linux. I don't know if you guys saw the news, but there was a ransomware attack a couple of weeks ago, Logbit 3.0. There were two companies which were targeted. I think one of them was Airbus, and the other one I can't remember. So these are some of the top ransomware threats which will be prevalent in 2022 and going in 2023. The market is quite big. If you look at the average cost of ransomware, it's around 800K, and the total we have paid is 27 billion. So there's a good reason for doing it. There's like a shadow market emerging from this. There are things like ransomware as a service, as I mentioned. People are now using AI to build ransomware and going after it. These Logbit, for example, they run as individual companies. They have people who are hired, they are trained, so they do research, they go after, scan the internet. They really are very organized. So this is becoming even more of a pain going in. Imagine if there was a fence to kind of pay ransom, or they were audit compliance issues or insurance issues, then you found yourself in a very tricky situation, and that happens, which is why you will see a lot of companies spend money on EDR kind of products, and they want to protect themselves against ransomware. But when it comes to cloud, we don't really have a good solution for it just yet, but I think we are getting there. Now, in terms of the cloud market, what is cloud doing about this? I'm sure many of you probably have heard of this before. Do you know what share responsive model is, or I'm about to bore you with the same knowledge? No, okay. Okay, the shared responsibility model is a very important concept when it comes to security in the cloud. It has been around for ever since cloud was, ever since maybe 10 years ago. But it has been maturing and evolving over time. As the cloud matures, as there are new products and services added to cloud, this is changing as well. So now you can see that, you have function as a service, which was something which wasn't a very common thing before. What this basically tells that it doesn't matter where you fall into your cloud adoption, which way you're using cloud. You might be using just a platform, you might be using infrastructure, you might be using SaaS applications, or you might be just building functions. You will always be, as a customer, responsible for some level of security. If you go from right to left, you can see that data and identity are something you will always have to be responsible for, no matter which platform you use in the cloud. And it's very important to understand that line of responsibility. According to Gartner, 99% of the time when cloud incidents happen, it's the customer's fault, and it's not the CSP's fault. Well, because they make it very simple for you guys, right? They're like, we are not security companies. Whatever you put in the cloud is your responsibility. Whatever we build, the software, the hardware, the other things, they will secure it. And they don't get breached. I don't think I've ever heard Microsoft gets breached a lot. AWS or GCP getting breached all the time. But a lot of customers do. This is another sort of way of visualizing the same idea, the same concept, is you will have basic security for any platform that you're using, even SaaS, PaaS, or IaaS. But as soon as you mature, imagine if you go multi-cloud, for example, then you're going to have to look at advanced level security. So you're going to have to understand the ideas and the concept of security in those areas. So CNAP, CSPM, CWPP. I'm going to explain what these are in the next few slides, but this is where the CSPs don't make it very obvious, and this is why you have to understand the shared responsibility model, where they will provide basic security, and then you have to add additional security on top to really call yourself secure. You still have the people and processes, which is your risk management, your governance, your monitoring, which is something which you have to do anyways. And then you have to add architecture on top. And this is what you're picking from. This is a slide from a company called Optiv. This is the most latest one that I could find, really. So when you're out in the market looking for cloud security software, you will have to pick from this little corner, which is highlighted in yellow. It consists of container security, microsegmentation, network security, application security, so on and so forth. Still, a lot of companies to pick from, right? And they all claim to do the same thing, by the way. But if you're doing cloud security, but you also have hybrid on-prem environment working, most of companies do these days, right? You're going to have to think about data center, which is now in sort of orange. But if you're doing data center, you're going to have to think about incident response and threat hunting. And if you really want to consolidate everything and really have a cohesive policy for strategy for security, you're going to think about vulnerability management and network security. And before you know it, I think it's like 200 to 300 companies and different vendors in your environment. And yeah, that's not an easy task. So what the analysts have been doing is they've been busy coming up with acronyms. They're trying to simplify this for us, right? They're trying to simplify these very difficult concepts and then align these different vendors in different categories. So currently we have these when it comes to cloud security, and I'm pretty confident they're going to come up with some new in the next few years. But we're going to focus on these. This is more relevant to us. We're going to focus on CNAP, CSPM, and CWPP, and we're going to go from left to right. Because this is what allows us to understand the ideas of shift left and shield right. So workload security is essentially vendors in workload security are usually vendors who protect your workloads running on premise and workloads running in the cloud. These could be your VMs, servers, Kubernetes, your serverless functions, anything which is a workload. And they usually do it by implementing behavioral-based analysis. So they do it in real time. And a lot of the time, they can also do threat hunting and other elements of EDR, which is converging into workload security. CSPM, on the other hand, is like an always-on security vendors, which allow you to visualize everything that you might be running in your cloud environments. Now, it's not an easy thing to do. If you have multi-cloud environments, multiple accounts, different people using different things, you wouldn't even know what assets you're running. So I think I heard the earlier speaker say that if you can't see something, you can't secure it. CSPM looks to solve that problem by giving you sort of a directory of all the assets, all the resources that you're running in a cloud environment. And then it enforces compliance and tracks any configuration changes over time. So if anything changes, the misconfiguration, public enemy number one, CSPM can fix that problem for you and also enforce compliance and kind of have the element of identity and data into it, so it can build more context. However, the problem with CSPM, it uses API, so it cannot do real-time security. So where CWPP uses agents, CSPM does it using scanning. They use agentless. CWPP mostly uses agents. To fix that problem, you have CNAP, which is a convergence of both of these technologies into one. And CNAP is trying to fix that by bringing different technologies into this different sort of under this CNAP umbrella. And the idea is that you should be able to have all of your security, cloud security needs under one single platform. It's a noble idea. It's really hard to implement, though. And most of these companies have, I think, gotten to a point where they're good enough. So you will have a lot of CNAP companies. You have seen very successful cloud security companies doing CNAP. In my personal opinion, they haven't been able to achieve the perfect solution. It's impossible to do it, I guess, because you still need the idea of the telemetry or bilateral telemetry coming in from agents and being able to enforce and take actions when you see something wrong. So detection is great, but being able to protect and take action when you see something is quite important. So I think that market is going to mature. We're going to see more and more sort of development in this. But right now, what we have is good enough. So CNAP is something which gets you to the point where you can say, okay, I have a baseline of security and it works. But what exactly is, shift left shield right? Well, simple idea, as I talked about it. Implementing security controls in your build cycle is shift left. So when you're building an application, for example, you would scan your code, static analysis. You're going to then scan your repositories for vulnerabilities. You're going to scan them for compliance. And you're going to do that at every step of the development cycle, every step in your CI/CD. And when whatever you're building, application, infrastructure, when it's up and running, you do runtime security. So any changes are tracked, and they're tracked in real time. And they're not just based on, ideally, they're not just based on detections that you have built policy-wise, but you're using more advanced technologies like AI. This is a good example of that, where you scan your images, scan for misconfigurations, deploy infrastructure, whatever that might be. You make that infrastructure immutable, put runtime agents, and those agents are then giving you real-time protection rather than scanning something in time and not being able to find something or being able to take action. Cool. How are we doing on time?
Great.
Oh, we have a lot of time, I told you. So this is a good example of an attack. This is an attack which is discovered by our vigilance service. So SentinelOne has an MDR, vigilance service, a research and development team. We uncover, isolate, investigate these attacks. And in this example, the attack is actually based on a Linux machine because, Linux, I talked about the Linux attacks earlier in the presentation. Linux is being targeted. This is actually a real thing that happened. The setup is a digital native business who have a sort of Linux-based file server, which is exposed to the internet, publicly exposed to its customer, partners, and remote employees. So this is something they rely on to do their business. There's nothing inherently wrong with it. I mean, Most of you guys probably have some sort of file sharing in place. Most people do. So there's nothing wrong with that setup. However, it's publicly exposed, and publicly exposed server or resources in the cloud means that they can be prone to risk. And we have adversaries, bad people, always looking out for these sort of things. So they scan the internet and they look for publicly exposed resources. Now, it's said that on average, 68 vulnerabilities are discovered every day. So it's not news that eventually a vulnerability was introduced into this file sharing system. And that vulnerability, basically, it was a bug that exploited the IBM Aspera FASX file sharing software, which uses deserialization. So it deserializes objects so they can sort of inject malicious code in them. The other problem with that vulnerability was that it could do it pre-authorization. There was no authorization needed for it. So a Linux-based file system, which is exposed to the internet, and a vulnerability which is pre-authorized. It's like a perfect combo. So the attacker goes to work. The attacker then sends a specifically crafted, obsolete API. The idea is to use that API to run a reverse shell, and the reverse shell is going to give access to the attacker to run arbitrary code on that machine. So this is what the attacker does. By the way, the attacker have also, in this instance, automated the reverse shell. So as soon as the API is sent, the reverse shell is plugged in, and they have access to the machine. This is the command they run on that machine. You can see the first thing they try to do is to try to delete the demo and the ifile directories from that machine. They do it for multiple reasons. They could be doing it because they want to offload the payload, or they want to compete with other sort of adversaries. But they try to do it, and they try to then download the file demo from their own infrastructure. They do the same thing for ifire. And then they try to make it executable. But before they could run it, it was picked up by, say, in this case, it was picked up by SentinelOne. But if you had any other real-time runtime security implemented, which was able to look at behaviors and look at how processes are running, they would pick it up. This is obviously a case for SentinelOne, where we can actually look at the entire storyline and how we detect it. We detect it behaviorally. We did it at machine speed because the attacker was using machine speed, so we were able to do that. And in this case, the policy was to detect only, not to take action. But if the policy was to take action, we would kill that reverse shell, and we would show you the alert in that manner. The key takeaways from this is that the victim did nothing wrong. There was nothing inherently wrong with that setup. A CSPM kind of technology would have never been able to pick it up because they run or rely on detections only, and they rely on scanning. The scanning doesn't work sometimes, which is why you need sort of runtime and real-time protection, I guess, agents. And ransomware is real. It's targeting Linux systems, and we have seen that again and again. So how do you build your strategy? What do you do? Simple, all of these things, right? Not really. So, it's easier said than done, obviously. I mean, with these economic conditions, you have everything that you need. But you probably have access to some of these things already with your traditional security tooling. And then you can use the same technology within your cloud environments. Or you can find more cloud-specific solutions. As I mentioned, a CNAP, which is in combination with an EDR product, might be able to give you all the visibility, all the access to misconfigurations, look into your identity, and be able to allow you to kind of have real-time protection if something goes wrong. So gives you the base sort of last line of defense. How do you choose which tools, which processes, which methodology? Well, it really depends on your business, right? Every business is different, and every business have different risk profile. So you have to ask yourself, what needs to be protected? What is your risk threshold? What are the things which are important for you? And then go from there, and then maybe look at your baseline security. See if you even have the basic things like visibility and sort of baseline security in your cloud environments? Are you even using all the technology available to you? And then assign people, the right people, the right sort of processes. It's always going to be about people and process and technology, right? So this is a questionnaire. You can ask yourself these questions. You can take a picture of it. But basically, it says you need to have the right people in right places, and they have to have the right responsibility. What I mean by that is, if you have a cloud team responsible for a platform, but they might not be always the right people to enforce security if they don't have the right tools in place. So you need to understand and assign those roles to the right people. Maybe the SOC team you have is not trained on cloud environments. They don't really know what is Kubernetes. They've never heard of it. So you need to implement, the right processes or the right tools to allow them to bridge that gap. Do you have, the right processes in case there was a cloud incident? Who is responsible for it? Where does it go? It goes to the SOC team, goes to the platform team. If you have vulnerabilities, who is responsible for patching those vulnerabilities? So basic questions, and go from there. And then obviously comes the technology part, which again is going to depend really much on what kind of business you are and what's your appetite for risk. With that, the key takeaways is obviously cloud is bad. No, cloud attacks will happen. This is something which is going to carry on as cloud becomes more mainstream, but they are means of stopping them, and they are technologies which are evolving. Machine speed attacks need machine speed, so basically I'm saying AI needs AI. And that's probably going to happen. You will see a lot of security companies adopting AI-based technologies. And yeah, building the right stack is going to depend on your organization. So hopefully that was useful. I think we have time for some questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Does anybody have any questions for Bhunesh?
Yep.
You mentioned detect versus protect. What are the drivers for going either way if when you sort of engage with companies and who are looking for the support?
The drivers are usually, so again, it depends on business, right? Some businesses require, for compliance reasons, for insurance purposes, for audit purposes, to have detection and response built into whatever security methodology they have. Other companies are still early on their sort of journey to the cloud. So they are going step by step. So the first thing obviously is to detect things and then enforce protection afterwards. So it really depends on companies. I've seen that the companies who would do it right, they usually go and start with the right foundations. They don't just focus on detection, they do the whole thing early on so they can have like a right level of security early on and then build on top of that. Yeah.
Anybody else? I wondered if kind of you were talking about how that organisation you mentioned as part of the example hadn't necessarily done anything wrong. But are you seeing within SentinelOne any typical size, sector, focus of organisation that is kind of finding vulnerabilities in their cloud platforms, and that's why they're kind of coming to you for support?
So all of them. So there's not a specific size. I think we work with very small companies, startup companies, sort of early days into their journey into the cloud. And then we also work with very large organizations which are very mature in the cloud, and they all have different problems and challenges. Mm-hmm. So the ones which are very mature have other problems. Their problems are more scale out. A lot of the time they don't actually have any control on what's happening, have lack of visibility, or they have very siloed teams, mm-hmm. where teams don't talk to each other, and it becomes impossible to enforce anything like a CNAP, which is sort of bridging the gap between code to production, because different teams don't talk to each other. Mm-hmm. So different companies have different challenges, but they all sort of have the basic challenges, which is they all have risk in their environments. And this risk is introduced just by the means of using something like cloud. Mm-hmm. Because it's very different from an on-prem environment where you control everything. You can switch off the internet, switch off the lights, and that's it. But cloud is a shared resource, so they need to understand where is that line of responsibility again.
Absolutely, and I guess particularly if you're working with a multinational, there was a question this morning that was talking about how do you enforce zero trust, like in various regions. So yeah, I guess it adds to the complexity.
It does, and I don't think there's any tool which can fix that. I think it's again goes back to the process, the culture that you have, and then sort of build it from ground up. Tools can help, but they don't fix the problem for you.
We've got a question in the front.
It's just a little bit outside cloud. So, for example, when you found attack happened, are you able to find original, like, is it a person or like the actual criminal, or is not something you do?
Yeah, good question. Usually in SentinelOne, we can't do that, but there are technologies like deception, where if you pick something early on, then you can basically deceive the attacker into thinking that they are attacking your environment, but you basically getting the information and actually counter-attacking them. So we do have a technology within SentinelOne. It's called deception, but it's more based on identity. But a lot of the time, what we detect are these vulnerabilities, for example, ransomware. They can be detected by our research and development team. In this case, but a lot of the time, when companies do get attacked, it's really hard to kind of see where it's coming from. Yeah.
You mentioned vigilance.
Yes.
Does that tap into any more information other than SentinelOne, or is it just the SentinelOne information it has?
So vigilance is our sort of MDR's team. They work with our R&D team and threat hunting team, and obviously we are a 10-year, 12 years old cybersecurity company. We have collected a lot of intelligence. So they are the team which have access to all of that data, but it's all specific to SentinelOne. But we do use a lot of third-party data to kind of gather information and determine something bad.
I think there was a question maybe in the third row.
Do you see any trend of cloud-native organizations being better or more secure than traditional organizations? And what do you think different organizations have to do to improve on that?
I mean, they start off at when they start off in the cloud, they usually are better off than more traditional companies just by leveraging latest technology. Now, I did say that cloud is secure compared to on-premise. I do believe in that. It is not as secure because the challenges are very different. So a cloud-native organization will have access to all of the tools and services available in the cloud, and they have really good offerings when you think of, but they're all basic security. You will, as a cloud-native business, eventually get to a point where whatever your AWS is, for example, providing you, is not going to be good enough for you. So you're going to have to look elsewhere. Maybe you are now going to use multi-cloud because AI is good with AWS, but your business intelligence tools are good in Azure. Or maybe your bill has becoming too big and now you have to diversify. So eventually you get to a point where you're going to have to look elsewhere. But a digital native business is always going to be more secure, I think, in my opinion. Yeah.
Any more? No? I believe SentinelOne have got to stand downstairs, so I'm sure if any other questions pop into your minds, Bhunesh or the team would be happy to answer them. But yeah, thank you very much, Bhunesh, for that session. That was really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for listening, guys.